Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar and interim rector here, and it is a joy and delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And for this season of Lent, because we are a parish in transition, our theme is transitions, and we're drawing on the wisdom of our own community. So last week we heard from psychotherapist and St. Bart's parishioner Trish Tidwell. This morning we hear from Yanina Saika, one of our parishioners who's been through a lot of change and transition, which we'll talk about in just a second. Yanina, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thanks, Peter, for the invitation. I wasn't sure I had enough to say to fill a forum, but I'm happy to be here.
I think you do, and we had two good preparatory conversations to get ready for today, and I think we realized that there was even more to talk about than we first thought. And one transition I didn't think about when I first reached out to ask if you would share some reflections was the transition you made at the age of 3. Coming as an immigrant to the United States. I had forgotten that you were an immigrant. Can you tell us about that journey and how it has shaped your life?
I sometimes forget that myself, but yes, I had to think that, in fact, I was born into a family in transition. My parents, both my mother and father, are from Belarus. They did not want to be there when the Soviets marched in at the end of World War II. My father and both my mother actually were pretty confident that Siberia was their ticket should they be found there. So they made their way. We lost the microphone. There we go. Yeah. Made their way into Western Germany, into a refugee camp. The post-World War II Europe was something on the order of 6-7 million refugees from all over. It was like somebody just stirred up the population. I was born in a refugee camp, and people were slowly getting resettled at the end of the 40s through a connection in the church community in that camp, because one of the women there had been to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago in the 30s. She made contact with a friend of hers in some place called Minnesota, wherever that was. And we ended up being sponsored by some farmers under a 48 Displaced Persons Act. So at the age of 3, I had a green card. And my earliest memory is the boat coming across. I was so impressed by the foghorn.
So you have some memories of this transition, but I'm sure you don't remember all of it. What was it like to be shaped by a transition you weren't fully aware of, at least fully aware of its consequences?
It was a little bit odd at first. They sent me to kindergarten at the age of 3 to learn English. English is not my first language, though it's my primary language now. It was a bit odd. It was a bit odd growing up. Belarusian, nobody knew what that was. So you're Russian. We are at odds with Russians. We hate Russians and so forth. But I kind of worked into it. There were other immigrants in the area where I grew up, so it wasn't totally isolated. It was kind of in a little community of Slavic people, including on Sundays. We often went to American church first thing in the morning, and then in the afternoon to the Slavic church, where you'd hear people read and preach in Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian in the case of my father. It was, in retrospect, that was a lot of church in one day.
Tell me about your parents' experience as immigrants and what it was like as you were growing up to see them adjust to this new country, this new society, this new world.
They slowly picked up, they felt blessed to be here, without question. And they slowly adjusted and got to a place where they just loved identifying as American, especially when someone would say something to them that seemed a bit off. My mother eventually made a trip back to Belarus to visit relatives, and She's getting on a train to go somewhere, and she turns one direction to go into a coach, and the conductor stops her. Oh, no, 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 that's where we have the African students. She says, what? This other coach is too crowded. She says, they're black people. She says, well, I'm American. I'm used to that. This is just fine by me.
What was difficult for them to adjust to in this country? What was challenging about transition, and what was life-giving about it?
Typical challenges for immigrants is not speaking the language anytime anything needs to be done with the electric company, with the phone company, with something at the courthouse. The oldest child gets to do that. That was, whoops, we lost it again.
Yeah, maybe if you can just adjust a little bit.
Yeah.
There we go.
I'll try to stay steady. That was me. So I did my negotiating early on, and I guess I didn't realize I was picking up a life skill.
There we go. Do we need I have a handheld, Yanina, and maybe that will help with things.
That might help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that work?
How about that?
I think he's going to turn it on in just a second.
Okay.
Try it now.
Let's try. There we go. Yeah, that works.
All right.
So it was in a way tough, in a way not. They worked hard. They were very hardworking. They were not educated people. My mother eventually told me how she learned the alphabet while pasturing cows in Belarus. Her girlfriend, would draw letters in the dirt to show her what the alphabet was. But, they also gave us a deep grounding in Scripture. I remember at an age of 5 or 6, everybody take turns. We went around the table. Everybody reads a different verse in King James English. That was a challenge, but we struggled with it.
So as your family is transitioning into life in a new country, you're growing up, and that's a certain kind of transition. You're also experiencing a transition in your vision. Now, you've always been, you told me, legally blind, but your vision decreased as you got older until a few years ago you became completely blind. Can you talk about that transition?
Yeah, that was one of the hard transitions in my life, and it continues to be challenging. As a child, everyone knew I was considered blind, even though I saw some and was able to read those, work my way through those King James verses. Could never catch a ball. I've never seen the stars, except for our sun. I think I saw Mars once, but that's it. Slowly, in my 20s, I lost the ability to read. By my late 20s, I need a cane to move around the world because I'm crashing into things. Little by little, what remains goes away. I was in California a little over a year ago. I asked my friend to take me to the coast. I wanted to see the sunset over the Pacific. One of the great joys of my life is the many sunsets I saw while I lived in San Francisco. Well, not this time. I couldn't see anything, so that's when I figured out, even that little bit that I used to have and rely on, the little bit that let me read with my eyes all the way through the shelves in the Minneapolis Public Library, all of that's gone. And what happens is that changes. Every time a little bit of a change, I adjust, and I learn how to deal with what's left. And then a little bit less is there, and I have to rethink everything and readjust yet again. So it's been a slow, constant change. I guess it's settled down because if I can't see anything anymore, I'm done with those changes, I think. Though there is a slight prospect of a medical surgery that might actually give me some back. We're talking, my care provider and I, about following up on that. But we'll see. That's so speculative.
Can you tell me what it was like as a kid to know that you were different, to know that you couldn't see in the same way that other kids could see?
That was not easy. That was just not easy. It was something it could be mocked over. It was something that kids can be cruel, and I got quite a bit of that. adjusting to that was just not fun. I worked my way through it, I guess, because I did have some intelligence, I guess a little more than average intelligence. So I worked on that, and I was a pretty decent musician. I learned to play piano at an early age, and I became known around the community for that, and that kind of carried me through. That was the exceptional thing that people did respect. But it was not easy. It got easier. All of that difficulty kind of eased as I got through junior high, and then it was less so in high school. I don't recall much trouble in high school, and really none at all by the time I got to Macalester College.
What do you think it was about that transition of growing older that helped kind of ease your sense of your own blindness and how it affected your life?
Well, accepting it and dealing with it was not something I managed well at first. When I think back on it, I wish we had acknowledged it a little more directly rather than just being freaked out about it. We could have done things. For instance, I talked about learning to play piano. Well, I had to lean over, get my nose up in the music in order to learn the Beethoven, learn the Mozart, and that means my hands are in my stomach. It's not a way to play. It's certainly not an easy, comfortable way. Well, if instead of bringing the nose to the music, we brought the music to my nose, that might have helped. We actually finally did that very late in my ability to see anything at all. A piano tuner suggested, and we said, oh, of course. And a carpenter quickly rigged something up, and I could pull the music rack up, and that was nice. Why we hadn't done it earlier, I don't know. Nobody thought about it. We didn't think in terms of accommodations that way so well back in the 50s. We've gotten better about that more recently.
You said that as you lost a little bit of sight along the way, you coped by adjusting. What does that look like?
That slowly, it would be things as crossing the street, something I have to do all the time in New York, and I promised my mobility instructor I would not try to do alone any longer, because I cannot fix on something across the street that will keep me walking straight and keep me from veering left and right. So adjusting means I stop expecting myself to do that alone and wait to meet somebody on the corner who will be my assistant across the street. Thankfully, New York's a great place for that. I very rarely need to wait more than one light cycle before somebody is, would you like some help? Yes, please, thank you. And off we go, and we have a little lovely chat crossing the street. But, I used to do that alone. I don't anymore. I remember a long time ago flying into Kennedy, and I had enough vision. I dared run across the highway to catch the bus that went up to Kew Gardens so I could get into Manhattan for a grand total of 40 cents. It was a long time ago.
So you've had this journey with your ability to see. At the same time, you've also had a journey in terms of understanding your own gender.
Yeah,
you were assigned male at birth. You came in your 20s or 30s to see yourself as a woman. Can you talk about that journey?
Well, something I knew about from a very, very early age. The earliest I must have been 3, 4, maybe 5 at the oldest. I felt like I'd been cheated. I got a raw deal being assigned male. I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. There's no choice about that. And besides, it's not something I can talk about because in those days that was a shameful thing. You just didn't talk about it. And I didn't. And you remember a few years later when I lost my ability to sing a high C, that was a depressing day. And that was when I sat around and said, okay, I have to do this. I will figure out how to do it. I'll learn to be tough because I have to be male. That's what I associated with it. And the consolation prize was, well, it was guys that ran the world. So, that's my consolation prize. I can look to that. A terrible way to think, but that's what I thought as a 6 or 7-year-old. I still remember that day. I can actually picture it.
So as you're older and come to terms with this truth more, what made you decide to act on this knowledge?
It was, this realization would come on me from time to time, and I would indulge in some kind of story, some kind of fantasy. We used to have something we called the wish book, catalogs, huge, thick catalogs of things you could buy from major providers like Sears Roebuck or Montgomery Ward. I used to turn the pages and plan wardrobes and where I would go, and I would travel, and I'd get away from this life I had to have and into the life I wanted. Eventually, literally one day, I'm married at this point as a guy to a woman, and one afternoon, evening, whatever, I decided to cross-dress with her clothes. I'm a little embarrassed about that still. For about a year and a half, maybe 2, I kind of did that. Told her about it. She says, okay, you do your thing. I don't know how you hid this from me, but I don't want to know about it. And eventually, it was less interesting to do that. That wore off. That was not interesting anymore. But what I realized one day, brushing my teeth, literally, brushing my teeth, clothes had nothing to do with how I feel about myself. And that's when I knew the change for me was, this had become too important that I didn't want to continue to live as a male in society. Even though I had a loving marriage, I would eventually get out of that. That was very hard to do. She was both supportive and also upset to lose her husband. So that was an ambivalence for her, and that made it hard for me. She did see what that meant to me, and in that way was very supportive. We took a long time. We separated, and she got to the point that she was willing to accept someone who cross-dressed from time to time, but she wanted her husband. And by then it was clear to me I needed to live as a woman in the world because that's what I thought about myself. I wish that would have been okay for her, but it wasn't, so we divorced. And by this time I had moved to San Francisco, away from Minnesota. Problem in Minnesota is, I knew too many people. Go around the corner, here's somebody I know, and they have expectations of me, and that's not the person I thought I'd run into when they recognized me. I needed a clean slate, a tabula rasa. That's why I ran away to San Francisco for my 30th birthday.
Mm. Tell me about that transition as it continued on. What was it like after living, at least to the outward world, as a man for 3 decades? What was it like to start living as a woman?
It was easy. In one sense, it was easy. In other mechanical senses, it wasn't so easy. I lived into my 20s. That means that all of those hormones had done their damage. I had a full beard for a year and a half because I could only afford student labor. I went to schools where they taught electrolysis, and follicle by follicle, hair by hair, bzz, 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 6-7 hours a day, 2-3 days a week for a year and a half. That was not fun, but I loved the results. I still love the results. And I knew I wanted to change. There was never a question. I knew I wanted the surgical sex reassignment. That means you talk to shrinks regularly for months and months and months. I had to have at least 2 therapists, one of whom played devil's advocate for me. So what are you going to do? You went through the change. It's all gone. What are you going to do if you decide all of a sudden it was a big mistake? That drove me crazy. I finally answered him. So look, I've managed to live socially right now with the wrong equipment. If I did change my mind later, I'll just do the same thing in reverse. And that satisfied him. Never really wanted to do that, but it was funny that he wanted to hear that kind of answer. Anyway, I got it. It took a few years for all of this to come about, and for me to find the money. I sold a Steinway piano I had. My mother hated that I did that. She was so angry. We bought that for your living, not for your foolishness, which is how she saw it. But that financed my surgery. And I was so thrilled to leave the hospital. I hadn't planned on that. I had not thought about it. I was so focused on getting things organized, getting things done, getting there, getting into the situation, that I had not actually thought about what I would feel like when I left and started the rest of my life. But I can still remember leaving that hospital. I was like a kid at a picnic.
So that transition was a relief.
Yes, it was a relief.
What has been difficult in the years since in living as a trans woman in this society?
By and large, people don't pick up on it. By and large, sometimes they do, and occasionally when they do, not everybody wants to accept me. I was told, I worked, my first time in New York 30 years ago, I worked as the IT director for American Foundation for the Blind, and I was told by one of the women in the Human Resources office there that she had to talk to the director about that. The director said, I don't know about Janine, I think she might be transsexual. And my friend said to her, I told her, I said, yeah, but can she do the job? And they decided that I can, so even though they weren't sure about me, they hired me anyway, and I'm glad they did, because all kinds of other wonderful things came about from that. By and large, I didn't need to deal with it on a daily basis unless there was some reason. So for instance, as I found my way back into church, there was one day that I actually needed to come out, and this is in an MCC of all places, which is a congregation where you expect maybe it's not a problem, and I'm not sure that I thought it would be, but I hadn't been out there. But I had agreed to go on the Geraldo Rivera show, and I was flying to New York that Tuesday to be taped and be on TV, and I was not going to go back to my congregation and say, oh, guess what, I didn't tell you in advance that I'm doing this because I want your prayer support. So I came out right in the middle of community prayer, which in their service meant people got to speak up while we were in prayer and speak aloud and have the whole congregation here. So things like that would happen here and there, but by and large, it was the only problems were in my own head of me accepting myself. I carry kind of a burden of that for quite a while, even still to some degree, settling that.
I'm glad you mentioned your MCC community. You and I talked that a number of transitions that have been important to you are also spiritual transitions. Yes. I wonder if you can talk about a few of those over the years, how your journey of faith has shifted and changed.
Well, I talked about reading King James. I was raised in a very evangelical church community that did not approve of people like me. And somehow I drifted away from it. I'm still not sure why, and at this point I don't know that anything I would come up as a reason would be meaningful because it's so very long ago. We're talking 50 years ago, but I did drift away in my college years and in my 20s, and it was late in my 30s or maybe even early 40s. I'd have to do the math anyway. When I worked my way back to church, I was dealing with a broken heart. Somebody said, you're picking bad people here. You need to pick people who are more growth-oriented. Try 12-step, and I did. I went to 12-step, and I said, after a while, I realized, oh my God, I know what's going on here, but they don't sing. But I know where they do, so I kind of knew at that point I was going to go back to church, even though I wasn't sure Christianity would make sense because, after all, Christianity condemned people like me. So I'd have to go back at least and figure out as an adult if I'm rejecting this or accepting this. Probably rejecting, I thought. But anyway, I woke up one Sunday morning, very pivotal day in my life. I woke up and I said, I need to hear some music today. I need a concert. But I don't have the money for the San Francisco Symphony. I can't afford a ticket. I spent a lot of my life with limited means. But I know where they do have good music, and it's free. You just have to show up. I went up top of Nob Hill to Grace Cathedral. And yes, I heard lovely, lovely music from the choir, but what I had not counted on is what it would do to my heart. I cried through that service. From beginning to end, I cried through that service. Somebody tapped me on the shoulder afterwards. She said, "Welcome to Grace." I took it for the double entendre, and I just never left, really.
One transition, Yanina, I know that you've gone through recently is moving up to New York to be at St. Bart's.
Yeah,
I wonder if you can talk about that transition.
it just had to be closer to you all physically. I'm so grateful for the virtual presence of St. Bart's Online. We're all in COVID lockdown. This is just a few years ago. I had recently resigned as music director for an MCC in College Park, Maryland. It's a story that would be a digression. Suffice it to say, I resigned in February, and in March we're in lockdown. It was literally just a few weeks. So I'm like everybody else on YouTube, okay, looking for a service at 11 a.m., looking around DC, looking for where's my next music gig. Deciding at one point, who cares where the other end of the wire is? Let's see how people around the world worship. I see if I can get into my Episcopal church in New York City, where I used to go regularly. I lived on the west side, so I took the train down to Wall Street. I couldn't get in on Trinity. I don't know why. They've got a very accessible website these days, but at the time I tried, for whatever reason, it wasn't accessible to me. I said, remember there was this place on the east side I visited once. Really nice people. I had a great time there. Maybe their website will work. Got into St. Bart's and never left. And you know, over time, what impressed me about you all is the way you love and take care of one another. You do it to a depth that is something I want to emulate more. That literally had this thought back in 1920, 21. So that's when I knew I was going to draw closer to the community. And even before I decided to move, I think I joined here, became a formal member. What happened to me in Maryland is I realized that I couldn't stay where I was. There was nothing that was forcing me out at any particular time, but the long-term financial reasons of where I was living would not work out. I needed to make a change in that. So the only question was where to, and not whether to. And the where to became, well, to my church community, of course. I prefer, in-person communion, not virtual. And I prefer the in-person hugs at the passing of the peace and so on and so forth. I'm glad for the virtual, very thrilled for it. But frankly, that's what I'd done in my work life since the 1990s, when I used to dial the phone into a computer at MIT. Enough virtual in my life. I need the real life thing.
When we talked in advance, I confessed to you that when you declared you were coming up to New York, I was much more skeptical than you were. You were bound and determined to make this move. Can you talk about what that was like for you?
Well, yes, I was bound and determined. I was bound and determined because I was basically bored living in a 55-plus community. Golf and badminton aren't my thing. It was a place where you needed a car to do anything, and that's just not me. It's never going to be me. I'm miss Manhattan, so that part was easy. I knew it would be expensive. I did the math. I figured out if I didn't lose any of the support I had in the work plus Social Security contracts I'm living with, the finances should work out. I would probably go down in the quality of my life. I went from 1,400 square feet to 450. But that doesn't matter. That's not important. What's important is the flourishing of the heart and the spirit, and being here, being with you in person in this church community is helped me flourish. And I'm slowly adding other things elsewhere around Manhattan into that mix. And it's exciting. I'm thrilled by it. I'm happy to be here. It was hard technically and mechanically because there's just so little I can really do for myself. I have to ask for people to do that. But I asked, and I got, and here I am.
Yeah, I'm wondering about those technical pieces, because when you moved up here, that's a little bit different from me moving to another location. As someone who can't see, you've lived in New York before, but not in this particular neighborhood. You had to learn an entire new terrain, and it's not necessarily as easy for you to get from point A to point B.
It very definitely isn't. The first little thing I needed to learn is, okay, I go out my front door, how do I find it to get back in? That's its own little challenge from the street. What are my little markers? What are my little guide things? I figured them out. That's the first step. The next step is where to find food.
And it sounds like you asked for a lot of help along the way.
I did. I asked for help, and people here did help. Starting with the day I moved, there was a wonderful gang of folks ready to unpack the truck that was blocking the one-lane road I'm living on. And they did it so fast. And it all got unpacked, and frankly, even finding a place to live in one weekend. I came up in July of 23, and I think where I'm living was the second place I looked at. Mark Zeisler was helping, and he said, you called me up on the phone just out of the blue. I'm sitting in the hotel. He says, how fast can you get up to East 78th Street? I said, yeah, pretty quickly. He says, well, they got an open house till 1 o'clock, and then they're gone. It might be a place for you. And it was. And the next morning, I'm filling out the application, and I feel, well, it's getting late. I'm going to be late to church. And he calls on the phone and says, you haven't submitted. I said, I thought I'd finish it this afternoon. He says, no, you got to finish it this morning. They're going to choose somebody by this afternoon. It's going to be too late. So, okay, I don't know if we were late to church, but we finished, got the app in. Went out to brunch, got in the car, went through the Lincoln Tunnel, driving down the Jersey Turnpike. Mark calls somewhere before we get to Delaware. He says, ready for some good news? It's yours.
Wow.
Not everything's a God thing, but darn it, there are too many coincidences here. It seemed to be like I needed to be here.
So, Yanina, I still have a few more questions for you, but I want to make sure we have a chance to get questions from those who are listening. If you're here in the room, Natalie Johnson has question cards. Just raise your hand and she'll come around with them and bring them up to me. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. Yanina, we chose as a theme for this conversation the change that chooses us. I wonder if you can explain that phrase to folks and how that illuminates your theory of transition and change.
Well, thank you, Peter. That was a great title. It was Peter's, and it's absolutely appropriate. I didn't choose to be an immigrant, but, that's what I was born into, a family in transition. I don't think I chose to be blind. I don't remember making such a choice, but that's a fact I've had to live with my entire life, and still have to live with. I don't think I chose to be trans. And while I didn't want to say out loud anything about that, I sure know that even when I didn't have words for it, that was my reality as a very, very young child, all the way through my teens. And I thank God that for the most part I was able to repress it and not have to have that sitting in my consciousness, because I don't know that I would survive day by day had I needed to do that. You know, it was always there. I always knew it, and somehow I'm struggled and avoided it until I didn't want to avoid it anymore. So.
And so having a change that's kind of foisted upon you rather than one that you deliberately choose itself, how does that affect your experience of coping with change?
It's attitude, I think. There are two choices. You can pretend it's not there. Very hard to do that with my vision. Would get me into a lot of trouble quickly. And frankly, got me into some psychological trouble to ignore the trans part. Though I guess for protection I needed to. It was a very different time in those days. It was something you were ashamed of. Choosing to deal and confront and cope is so much more rewarding, so much more powerful. I'm so glad I learned over time that, you know, I can trust God, that I am who I am, all of it by God's grace. And it's up to me to make sure that that's not in vain. And being forthright is how I need to do that.
What advice do you have for the fellow members of your St. Bart's community who are here, who are facing transition? Maybe it's the parish transition, maybe it's transition in some other way in their lives. What wisdom do you have to share with us?
Well, I think it's what I just said. I think that being quiet about anything that we're concerned about is just not useful. Find somebody to trust to talk about anything that seems a little bit touchy and difficult. It's okay. It's actually healing to get it out. But more than that, we can trust God. We can trust our very mighty God, that there will be a good outcome at the end. We have a process in our transition as church to a new record. We should trust the process. It's been developed over time. We will put God in the center of it, and we'll make it work. And meanwhile, we'll deal with the issues that come up in between in a prayerful and forthright manner. I hope. That's my best advice. I have learned to trust the Lord. I wasn't so upfront about that once upon a time, and it didn't come to me so easily. It's really the first place I go anymore. It's so much easier, and it's so much more rewarding.
One person who submitted a question pointed out that you're an immigrant, you're a person with a disability, you're also transgender. Those are all three kind of hot button controversial identities in our times, all three vulnerable populations. In the context of this socio-political climate in which we're in, what kind of prejudice do you experience, and how do you cope with that?
Well, I see prejudice from my government now, which I did not expect. I have a passport, says female, that's correct. Fortunately, it doesn't get renewed until 2031. But if this MAGA crowd gets reelected, they don't want to give me a passport that says female, and I'm not taking one that says male. I'm sorry, that's just not a bathroom I'm going back to. For all kinds of reasons we don't need to get into. So what I'm going to do about that, I don't know. I have a few years to figure it out, but it's so sad, that someone can think they can undo God's creation by executive order. The designation of transgender has come off the Stonewall Monument, which is a national park. If you go to their website, it says LGB, and that's it, which is funny because it was drag queens that started and led that whole response in 1969. I guess they don't know the history.
One person asks, and recognizes that you don't speak for all trans people, but inherent in the trans label is a sense of transition. Is there ever a moment in which you're fully transitioned?
Oh, I think mostly. I don't think about it unless, I'm preparing to talk about it to you all. Or something else in my life has made me think. I've gone through this several times. That I rethink the whole thing. Was it the right thing to do? I dig as deeply as I can, even with the help of a therapist sometimes still. The answer always comes out the same, and I come out stronger. And, in this process, just for being here today, I've come to someplace new. Would I rather have been born female to begin with? Yeah, I think so. Would I rather not have been blind? Yeah, I think so. But who is that person? I don't know her. So I guess I'm okay with who God made me to be, and I guess I'm okay with the journey God put me on. Because I know this person.
Someone writes this, Yanina, I have so much admiration for you. To what do you credit your tremendous courage, optimism, and perseverance?
I'm not sure, but, maybe those parents who are willing to walk from Belarus to Warsaw, basically. It's a long way. Because they had a dream and an understanding. Maybe it's having to deal with being blind and not being able to catch a ball and find a way to, I don't know. I can say that over time I've learned to trust God. That's a very big part of it. And I've learned that speaking up is far more rewarding than staying quiet. So I'm trying to be quicker to be courageous, if that's what's called for. I'm trying to be quicker to ask someone for the help I need. And I'm trying to learn to be more gracious at simply accepting people's support instead of trying to do everything myself and prove how capable I am. All right, I'm pretty capable, but I don't have to do everything myself. That's nice.
I think you underlying the importance of accepting help from others is an important lesson of transition, that we can't do it all on our own.
No, I don't think anyone can. It's nice to have community. Remember our former rector talking about this Christianity thing as a team sport. That resonated with me.
Yeah, we're one body with many, many parts.
Yes.
Someone wonders, as someone who's from Belarus, what you make of the geopolitical situation today, and especially the role of the former Soviet Union.
Well, these are very hard times. I feel for the extended relatives whom I don't know except for one person, and I'm not even sure she's still alive. I feel for them. I think it's a very, very tough time. I feel for the people in Ukraine. That's really very near where my parents are from. And over the world, it's a very difficult time, including us. We seem to be becoming new Belarus. That's not a happy thing in my view. I think we have a responsibility as Christians to witness to what we witness to. That's justice, that's mercy, and that's walking humbly with our God. That's being neighborly. And when we see injustice and we see lack of mercy, we need to say something. And we need to do something about that. And God will take care of it from there.
One of the bullet points we didn't get to on my list, but someone has submitted a question about is your career journey. Can you talk about, you've had a music career, you've had an IT career, you've worked in disability access. Can you talk about briefly your journey as a professional?
Yeah, I had a music career which almost took off. I probably would, if I were not blind, would have had a full music career as an accompanist, singer, instrumentalist kind of thing. Probably not, solo and Philharmonic Hall, Gepin Hall, I guess we call it now. Probably not that, but pretty close to that level, I think, at my best. But I couldn't do that. You have to really read music on the fly to be able to do that, so that just wasn't going to happen. And I was sort of at loose ends in San Francisco, not knowing what to do with myself. I was working out electronic music, in those days early on. It was all wires, and you plugged them into sockets, and you turned knobs, and you threw switches this way and that. And interesting music would come out of speakers, and I was having a lot of fun doing that. I wasn't sure exactly where it would take me, but what happened is they brought a computer into the studio, and they said, "Oh, let's get Janina on the computer." "Oh, how's she going to read the screen?" "Oh, of course, let's see if there's any assistive technology for this Mac." They got the people out with the assistive technology, installed it, and oh, look at that. It didn't even see that icon. It just jumped right. "Oh, I don't know, Janina. You're going to have to go study computers. Maybe you can figure out how to fix it." They sent me over to start taking a computer course. And I learned to program in AppleSoft Basic, and not a very good skill for very long, but boy, I was good at it while it lasted. And that led to the local computer users group of blind people in the San Francisco Bay Area used to get together once a month. They elected me president after a while, and I was president for the rest of my years in San Francisco. Out of that, I got asked to be on an advisory board for a California-funded project educating people with disabilities on how to advocate for themselves. Out of that, I got invited to be an assistant, a program assistant at the World Institute on Disability. That was a pivotal moment, because some of the people responsible for the independent living movement were my bosses, were my top bosses: Ed Roberts, Judy Heumann, who passed away just recently. Very, very, very influential people in self-determination for people with disabilities. I was the tech expert there. I gave Judy her first lesson in how to use email. Basically, I like to say they hired me because I knew email and they didn't. Back then, that was a big deal. From that, when they said, "We don't know where the funding is going to come for you," that's when I applied at American Foundation for the Blind, and they moved me east out of San Francisco. And then eventually they said, "No, we're wasting your talents worrying about people's printers and modems." And in those days, it was still modems. And they said, "No, we need you advocating. You're too good at helping other people understand what the issues are and what the available remedies might be." So I got moved to governmental relations in Washington, D.C., and talked to the FCC and talked to people on the Hill. And from that, I started working in access to printed material, alternative access, ebooks. I saw ebooks coming as a very, very big deal in the 1990s. That put me on an international track. And I got into my 50s saying, I've been to most states in the US, but I haven't traveled internationally. Oh well, life wasn't going to go that way. Surprise. Been to Europe more times than I can count. Asia 7 or 8 times. Australia. I love it. I'm still not tired of it. I've been blessed by it. I'm still doing web standards development, trying to make sure that the technology that shows up in your browser in 3, 4, 5 years works, and the content at the other end, because it needs to be an end-to-end solution, that all that fits together and allows people with disabilities to participate as if they had none, or very close to having none. Because it is possible. We can do this with technology if we set it up right.
Oh. Well, Janina, unfortunately, we need to end there because we all have to get into church. Yeah. It's not typical in the Episcopal Church. It's not one of our treasured traditions to have testimony, but I think you have shared your testimony with us today, and we are so grateful for it, and we're grateful for you and the gift of you in this community. Thank you,
Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Yanina, you can't see it, but some people were standing for you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Thanks for watching online. We hope whether you're in person or online, you'll join us for worship at 11 a.m. Next week at the Forum, Julie Ross, our own Julie Ross, who is one of the co-leaders of our youth group, will be talking about change from the perspective of adolescence. Looking forward to that conversation next week. Hope to see you again then.
Okay. Thank you. All right. It works out. It happens. I don't mind holding a opportunity. Yeah. Let me start with my jacket because thank you, Andy. Let me start by putting, yeah.